Hello and welcome to the CBB Supershow, brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, coming to you a little bit late this evening. Was finishing up a little bit of stats and everything with my sheet and just kind of trying to get over and ready for this 12-game slate. We're doing all these complaining and especially me about the split slates that we've been dealing with. 9-game main, 6-game night, 10-5. It's been okay, but what happens is it ends up really upping the variance and really watering down the player pool. So we get ourselves a nice little throwback to what DraftKings normally provides us, which is a full and just robust slate for the Wednesday, January 31st of 2024. 12-game slate. It does lock 30 minutes earlier than what normally happens. Try to remind you guys of this when the slates do lock earlier. There were some people in the industry today in the Discord as well. Got caught with their pants down a little bit, so make sure you realize 3:30, 6:30 Eastern. Do not forget. Don't want to get caught without your lineups being ready. Huge, huge slate. With that being said, because it is late at night, for those of you watching live, and I appreciate that, or on demand, I'm going to be very efficient with each game. We're not going to go through each and every single lineup aspect as we normally do. I try to be very, very in-depth with the show, but we're going to have to do this one a little bit differently. If you are watching live, or even if it's on demand and you're right before lock, maybe you're waking up with a cup of coffee, dropping your kids off at school, listening to me on your way to work, I appreciate that. Please drop a like if you so choose to do so. It's such an easy thing to do, and it really does help the program out and the FTN network itself. Very, very grateful with the audience that we have and how you guys continue to support us throughout. It's almost February. Before you know it, it's going to be March Madness, and then be on the air, in your ear, on your screen, whether that's a projector, the phone, the laptop, the TV, whatever it is. I'm going to be there each and every day as we're into March. I'm feeling pretty excited. Props were killer today. DFS mixed results. We had some injuries, man. Injuries galore. Really tough day with injuries. Malik Renew, Indiana, 3 minutes in, ends up having to leave the game on crutches. Bayandongo for Georgia Tech, I believe, has a concussion, some sort of head injury. Xavier Johnson suffers what appears to be maybe a broken arm. I'm not sure if it's what the extent of that is. Different injury than what he's normally had, but really good chance that Xavier Johnson's collegiate career is done. Hate to see that. Just can never stay healthy. Indiana did get a win today, by the way. Lots of going on, lots of injuries. You hate to see it, but this show must go on. Going forward, I don't know what the Hoosiers are going to do with all of those injuries there. It looks like Malik Renew is going to be out long-term as well. Chase Ross, something happened today I did want to talk about before we get into the slate. Chase Ross, who was expected to be out long-term, more than 4 weeks, ends up coming back a little bit early. Had to see it on the Instagram of Marquette saying that Chase Ross is back, but it didn't seem like he was going to play. Somebody else reported that he was still out. Didn't start. Ben Gold started, who ended up being super chalky. He played 17 minutes because, go figure, Chase Ross comes off the bench and plays 31 minutes. People complain about a lot of stuff in DFS betting, college sports especially. I'm no different. I try not to complain, but, obviously 2 fouls, that's something that people still complain. I've played long enough that the 2 foul thing doesn't bother me. When it happens, it is what it is, right? But the starting guys and then yanking them for someone off the bench and that plays, double the minutes, triple the minutes, it's really, really irritating. It really, really is irritating and makes me irate to the point where, why didn't you just start them? Like, I don't understand that point. And we see it. And I talk about the fifth Beatle all the time on the show and in my writing. Basically, there's the fifth starter, the dreaded fifth starter, if you will, where they're going to be starting, but they're not going to be playing that many minutes. They're not a focal point. They have a low usage rate. They're really not that great of an option. And we know who those players are because they still continue to start, and we can recognize that. But with a situation like Ben Gold and Chase Ross, you just really don't know what to expect there and how that's going to shake out. So a lot of us had Ben Gold, didn't work out. But I will say, Chaz Kelly made value for Boston College. That was nice. And my man Brandon Murray, thanks to like 3 or 4 steals, ends up putting up 20 fantasy points at like 2%. Really happy with Brandon Murray. Now, we take the good with the bad on the show, as you know. So while I'm patting myself on 4 or 5 Brandon Murray, I have to sit here and tell you, wow, how wrong I was about Quentin Post, who had like 9 turnovers and just played awful. Somehow BC still super competitive despite that. And then, of course, Tolu Smith, major foul trouble on the road. It is something that can happen with him. Didn't pan out all the way. We still had some good production overall. Harrison Ingram crashes and makes his props. He continues to play well. Armando Bacot, who is so cheap at 7-2, pretty chalky again. Starts off really hot. I don't think he had almost 8 points, 9 rebounds, 10 rebounds, something like that at halftime. Proceeds to do absolutely nothing in the second half. At first, you watch North Carolina games, and it's like, okay, they're not passing the ball. They have the wrong people around him, But lately, you've been watching North Carolina games, maybe the last 3, 4, 5. And RJ Davis is having to take so many shots because the Carolina offense is so stagnant otherwise, and Bacot's not actually looking to shoot. Before, it's real easy to write off and be like, they're not passing the ball. But I really try to watch as many games as I can. I have streaming in my office here and multiple games playing. I try to go back and watch games while I'm at work. I'm listening and watching the games. I'm soaking it all in. And watching Carolina games, it just seems like Bacot, there seems to be a lackluster effort there from him lately. And if you go on to Carolina Twitter, their fans are starting to say it as well. And I know people are mad because they ended up losing a game to Georgia Tech today that they had no business losing, especially with Bayandongo getting hurt in the first 5 minutes. But my God, when they drop a game like that and Bacot gets outplayed in less minutes by Jalen Washington, you have to question it. And at this point, Bacot's price was probably going to be 6'8", 6'9", continue to drop. We're going to have people continuing to play him. You're going to have to make a decision here on maybe Bacot's just not that guy this year. And it's crazy because he stayed in college the entire time. He's an elder statesman by collegiate standards, and this Carolina team suddenly looks a little susceptible. And that just goes in with the narrative we've been talking about. This tournament, you thought last year had parity and craziness, chaos, madness, if you will. Just wait until this year's tournament because it is going to be ridiculous. Like, there's literally no scenario in the tournament that would surprise me at this point. Like 2 16 seeds winning would be like, wow, that's not unfathomable. So it's going to be wild. We saw a Kansas team today without Kevin McCullough just absolutely blow the doors off of Oklahoma State after struggling with him. We saw Tennessee lose a game against South Carolina that they should not have lost. South Carolina, Michi Johnson, fully broken right now. Another pretty mediocre offensive game from Michi. Dalton Connect went completely bonkers, as Dalton Connect does. But overall, no one else in the Vols gave him help, and they lost the game to South Carolina. And when you look at the South Carolina box score, nobody really went nuts for them. A couple of bench players. Josh Gray gave them some minutes, but it's just speaking to the fact that it is going to be a crazy tournament. You might as well offer $10 billion for a perfect bracket because it's never going to happen. Not in my lifetime, not in yours, not in your kid's lifetime. Like, never, ever going to happen. All right, before we get into slate, I do want to talk about one more thing. I don't pretend to be a barstool show or a show that, talks about any drama. You guys are here to listen to me talk about fantasy college sports. I get that. I know my place in the industry, and I love providing that content with you. But I want to bring up something that is really bizarre with Jeff Goodman. got to give a take on this, right? Because it's a hot button issue. There is if you don't know by now, a guy with a DePaul Blue Team's Twitter handle made a documentary about Providence and Ed Cooley, and it's a pretty damn good documentary. If you haven't seen it, I'll post it on my my Twitter after this. Just kind of interviewing people about, you know, the whole thing going down with Cooley coming to Providence, building it to what it is, and then leaving for Georgetown. Like, you know, people have the right to be mad about that, right? And Goodman gets in this guy's DMs and starts telling him that he's going to go to prison, and he hopes he looks good in orange. And I think that backfired on him quite a bit, right? Because most of CBB Twitter completely dogged him. Made him give this really weird, just a couple of hours ago, semi-apology where he read a teleprompter for like 4 sentences saying that he's always going to go to bat for his guys, meeting John Fanta because he was in that documentary, but not really giving an apology. So making it 10 times worse, right? I like Goodman. I think he's fine. He helps people out. He's a knowledgeable guy, but a little bit fakey, right? And I just have to say, I don't like the fact that he made Barstool. If you like Barstool, that's cool. But it makes Barstool seem like they are making good points lately because of how, I don't know, silly Jeff Goodman sounds lately. So just wanted to give a quick take on that because that's going around the college basketball landscape right now, and just a very bizarre thing that's not going to go away. And every time Goodman posts anything, updates, everyone's just going to continue to ask him if that team is in orange or if he's wearing orange. So enjoy the Big East trolls for the next, I don't know, rest of your life on Twitter there, buddy. All right, let's get into the 12-game slate here, what you came for, what you paid for. All right, first game on the docket here, we're going to get into Alabama versus Georgia. Now, there's a multitude of high-scoring games on this slate. I'm thinking we're going to see a pretty high-scoring affair throughout. It's going to take some pretty big scores on this one. We just saw a really crazy main slate, a lot of bust. It didn't take a super high score. Again, there was some variance there with guys getting injured and foul trouble, whatever. We're talking about 3 or 4 games on this slate that are super high scoring projected wise. Alabama versus Georgia, this happens to be one of them. Now, Bama's 6-point favorites, total of 165. We know how Bama's going to play it. They're going to be pushing the pace. They're going to be shooting threes, getting to the rim. That is the style that they play. Under Nate Oates, they're going to continue to do so. Ken Palm's projection for this one, 85-79 in favor of Bama. I would not be surprised to see them push towards 100 points. 21st fastest tempo in the country, number 1 rated defense on Ken Palm. Georgia playing at the 85th fastest tempo. And right now at 14-6, they just suffered an overtime loss to Florida in which it was 102-98. Both teams scored a tremendous amount of points. This one is definitely going to be on the high scoring side as well. We want to look at both sides. Now, I want to apologize in advance because I have 4 kids, if you don't know already. 3 of which are here all the time. And kids get sick, right? So we just got over a sickness in my house probably like a month ago. And it's back. So you may see me, I'm always blowing my nose, I know, but you may see me a little nasally. That's why. We'll get through it. We'll make it happen. But that is why I'm a little bit on the sickly side here tonight. All right. So RJ Melendez, we got to start by talking about him. His price is $7K. That is going to be incredibly ludicrous to pay, especially when he's been under $5K for a lot the last month of the season. He just had the biggest game of his life, his entire career. It would be very, very surprising if he did replicate this ever again. In 33 minutes against Florida, 13 for 19, hit 6 threes, 5 steals, 35 real points. He put up 54. It's not a mistake. RJ Melendez put up 54. But I'm happy they priced him up at 7K, didn't leave him at like 5K. The old DK style would have just been really slow. Priced him at 4.9. It actually would have been better because everybody would be running to roster him. And he's still not that great of a play, even if he was priced at 5K. Now, the matchup on paper is obviously fantastic, and it's going to play to his strengths in that he's going to be able to shoot a lot. But do we really think that 30-plus minutes is going to continue for him? That's probably more of an outlier. I think we get him back into more like the mid-20s. Forgot to add them to my sheet. All right. So that it'll be interesting to see if people chase that performance, but it's certainly not the best spot there. And especially on a 12-game slate, we don't have to go there. And that's the nice thing about it. If this was a 3-4 game slate, that would be probably a little bit of a different story. Now, he came off the bench to play those 33 minutes. Georgia's still, as far as we know, going to be running the starting five of Russell Teshwa, Jabri Abdur-Rahim, Silas Demery, RJ Sunahara, and Noah Thomason. And this speaks to what I just said at the beginning with the fifth Beetle, the dreaded fifth starter. RJ Sunahara continues to be a starter, but we know he's not going to play any more than 10 minutes. He played just the 3 minutes in that last game, never really going to be in the game for more than just that first, 2-3, the first media timeout. He's done. Blue Kane and Justin Hill also played over 30 minutes there. Silas Demery fouled out in 18, and that's a lot of the reason why Hill, Kane, and Melendez saw a huge bump there in their playing time. As far as anyone else on this team, Noah Thomason is cheap at 5.5. He hasn't really been able to find his ability like he did at Niagara, where he was a gifted scorer, really solid overall fantasy option. Now, Justin Hill does have an injury tag here because of an ankle issue that he suffered. If he were to be out, that obviously bumps not only Thomason up in terms of minutes and usage, but also Blue Kane, who just saw those additional minutes there, only 4.6. Talented freshman that they like a lot, and they want to get more time. So depending on how that news shakes out, Blue Kane at 4.6 is probably going to be one of our favorite value plays of the first few games on this one. Thomason at 5.5, he's had the opportunity to show us, and he's taking lots of shots, but his peripherals are lacking. And even at the 5.5 price, he's not necessarily a lock and load, but I would expect him to play 30-plus minutes without Justin Hill, something to keep in mind there. Russell Teshwa at 6.9. His price is really high, up $1K after back-to-back 32-plus fantasy points, and that's against the likes of LSU and Florida. His rebounding ability is nasty. Going up against this Alabama team, he can take advantage of their front court, and I do like him, and if we get some props on him, perhaps we can attack that avenue. He does have a 32% combined rebounding rate, over 3% block rate. Price has gone up. Might have missed the boat on him, but he's definitely still worth some GPP consideration there due to matchup. And then Abdur-Rahim at 6.2. Again, without Hill, that would be some additional time and effort for him. Alabama side, it's usually always Mark Sears for me. Every time they're on the slate, I'm looking to roster some Mark Sears regardless of price. He's been a little bit underpriced, especially lately. He is probably somebody I would expect in this matchup, knowing how good it is against Georgia in a fantasy-friendly environment, going to be a little bit on the higher owned side. Now, I'm hopeful with it being a 12-game slate, we see more spread-out rostership, and we have really the last couple of weeks. But looking at Sears' price, 8.6, it's at least high enough to make people think about it. It's not an auto click. He had been priced in the 7.7, 7.8 range after a few mediocre games. He exploded against Auburn for 44. Follow that up with a pretty strong performance against LSU at 35, 36 minutes even perhaps there. I would expect him to take upwards of 15 to 20 shots. And he has a considerable amount of upside when it comes to assists, steals, and rebounding categories. So Sears is the guy, but you got to have the money to pay up for him. Even at that 8.6 price point, I think he does sail over 4X. You do have Grant Nelson, a little bit high for me at 7.6. Now, matchup-wise, there is some DVP here. With Russell T playing so well, it hasn't been as an elite spot for opposing front court players to target against Georgia, but it still is a solid enough look. Now, Nelson does a little bit of everything with his versatility. He can shoot threes. He can bang down low. I'm not a hater of him, but I do say every time Alabama's on the slate, I'm a little bit leery of him just because in these tougher matchups in the SEC, he tends to disappear a little bit. It's not going to be banging with Janai Broome or somebody like that. But up against that Georgia front court, he certainly could. Now, he only took 4 shots against LSU. That was a blowout game. He lost some minutes from there. So we looked to their next competitive game, which was against Auburn, when they won by 4 points there in a very fast-paced game. He had 31 minutes and put up 14 and 11. So you can see here that Nelson is capable. 7-6 price is just a little bit uncomfortable for me. I will probably be looking elsewhere. Latrell Wrightsell at 6K. Since getting into the starting lineup, he has been absolutely cooking. We knew Wrightsell had the ability, right, from his previous stop. He just had to get the opportunity and the minutes, and that was a problem because of the logjam at his position with Rylan Griffin, Sam Walters there playing a little bit out of position, Davin Cosby, the talented freshman, Aaron Estrada, who comes in from Hofstra expecting to do, ungodly things. But at Cal State Fullerton, especially last year, Wrightsell was a scoring machine and just a very gifted defender, and he fits into this system so well. And we've seen him at the last 2 games start 29 minutes and 33, and he hasn't had a huge spike in usage by any means, but his efficiency has gone up, and we've seen him score 26-plus fantasy points because he's been absolutely red hot from long range. 9 threes in his past 2 games on 16 attempts. Big time stuff here for Wrightsell. The price is 6K. If you didn't use him earlier at the depressed price in the 5K range, it's probably a little bit tough there to now pay 6K. You're not getting the discount that you would want to have. So you're probably going to have to fade him because I don't want to chase that at this point. All right. Loaded up on medicine before too, so that should be fun. Rylan Griffin there at 5'9". We do get a price discount on Griffin, even though, his minutes have bounced around. His starting spot has been in question here. He did end up starting there in the blowout game against LSU, played just the 18 minutes. And when he didn't start against Auburn, he played 30. So he's relatively safe in terms of even if he doesn't start, he's going to be on the floor. So we don't worry about that necessarily. What it was, the starting lineup they ran most recently, Sears, Estrada, Wrightsell, Nelson, and Griffin. Little bit of a smaller lineup there. They felt like they could run with LSU, and they did, and it was quite good. I think that Griffin is probably a sneakier look. He's not quite cheap enough to make people feel like he's some kind of, solid or super value, but he's not expensive enough to completely go ignored either. If you give him 30, 32 minutes in a game that could stay competitive, Georgia's not as horrible as they've been in the past. They are at home. I think for the first, 3 quarters of this game, we're going to see a game that is within, 3, 4, 5 possessions, something like that. I do like Griffin quite a bit at 5'9". Looking at it, and he's cheaper by $100 than Wrightsell. He seems to be the play that I want to have, and I would imagine we get him at a little bit of a depressed ownership as well. Nick Pringle's there at 4'4". Now, he didn't start last game because fouls, and he's really been ineffective. He's not much of a threat on offense. When he's not blocking shots or getting rebounds, he doesn't offer a lot. So only 8 minutes off the bench against LSU. If he were to be back into the starting lineup here, I don't think he will be. You can maybe consider him to a degree, but that playing time there looks really rough. And then Sam Walters, high fantasy point per minute type player, but the minutes are all over the place right now. Stick to paying up for Sears or Griffin, or if you want to ride Wrightsell further. And on the Georgia side, we want to see what happens with Hill, Blue Kane, Noah Tomlinson. Those are the 2 that we want to look at there. All right, moving on to the next game. We have St. John's versus Xavier. Xavier 1-point favorites, total of 156. Now, St. John's is in a similar spot, or at least with Joel Soriano, that North Carolina is with Armando Bacot. We have seen them screw around with his usage. His minutes have kind of bounced around, and it's a clear lack of alpha on this team and pecking order that's not established. That lack of pecking order has made it very difficult for Soriano to stay consistent enough to be an elite upper echelon play. It does keep his price relatively low, 7-7. Now, he just had a really nice game against Villanova, 21-9. Like, that's vintage Soriano. That's what I expect from him. Going up against the Xavier team on the road, this is a great matchup. We know Xavier's front court, they're a little bit unrefined, undersized. They can be bullied around. And you might remember right before Christmas, St. John's absolutely detonated at home, 81-66 against Xavier. There was an 18-point, 14 rebound, 6 block performance from Joel Soriano. It's one of the last times he put up a number above 40. It's been a month and a half since then, and he has been stuck putting up 25 to 30, which isn't horrible at the current price of 7-7. But I demand to see him play 30-plus minutes in this matchup, and I demand to see him take 10-plus shots. Whatever that, if that comes off of putbacks or, alley-oops, wherever it comes from, I need those double-digit shots. He's only 7-7. I think people probably smart enough to know that this matchup is good. Continuing to be a starter. There are a lot of guys around him that are going to be taking shots, and it really is a situation in which if he didn't pan out, it wouldn't necessarily surprise us all that much. But I think we have to just play the matchup here and ride with him, because this is an absolute great spot and a depressed price of 7-7. Other options on St. John's, and honestly, there are a lot of them, like we've just mentioned. You have that's the wrong team. All right. All right, sorry about that. Dennis Jenkins there at 7-2. We know lately he's been relatively, for his standards, mediocre. That has caused his price to stagnate somewhat. Still playing big minutes, still the lead guard. If he's not scoring, he's usually assisting on each bucket. So I do like him in this spot against Xavier. Matchup, environment, everything works out good here for Jenkins, but it's not that much more to Soriano. He would be the one that I would prefer. Jenkins more of a GPP type of look. Now, St. John's playing at the 96th fastest tempo, while Xavier playing at the 54th fastest tempo. I do think these two teams will play into the 80s. Xavier was just embarrassed by UConn on Sunday, 99-56. They'll be looking to bounce back here. Offensively, they have some dudes, right? But otherwise, defensively, I think they're going to get cooked here, even at home. Now, this is where it gets interesting with the rest of the St. John's lineup, because there are some depressed prices here that we want to certainly consider, and guys with multi-position eligibility that are also interesting. The starting five for St. John's has swapped from time to time. We've seen Glenn Taylor there. We've seen Brady Dunlop. We've seen Jordan Dingle, Naheem Aline, who's banged up. The last game, they went with Ledlam, Jenkins, RJ Lewis, Soriano, and Simeon Wilcher, the talented freshman. Off the bench, we saw Jordan Dingle, who's finally healthy after being sick, along with Rick Pitino. 25 minutes. He did make 12 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. It was one of the better games for Dingle that he's had in quite some time. Glenn Taylor, 19 minutes off the bench. Zuby Ejiofor, 10. Brady Dunlop and Drizza Traore played under 10 minutes. Where I'm looking here is Chris Ledlam, who's at 6'4", didn't have the greatest game against Villanova. I do like him here. If you're playing any fades of Soriano, I think this is the guy you want to have, him or perhaps even RJ Lewis. Ledlam does rebound at a very high level. He does have this feeling of being the alpha on the team. There are a ton of shots that he does end up taking that sometimes make you question it. But he's a very active player, and he does fill out the stat sheet nicely. So we're getting a nice price on him here at 6'4". Then you have RJ Lewis at 5'9". His price had gone up like mid 6K. It made it really difficult to get to him, because generally he's going to be about 20, 22 fantasy points. We like it. We can take that. We're getting a slight discount here at 5'9". He did take 12 shots against Villanova, only made 3. The game before that against Marquette, he took 18, taking a high number of shots. His shot rate has actually ballooned to nearly 30%, one of the highest on the team, 27% usage rate, only making 28% of his threes, still taking that volume there, and has a steal rate of nearly 5%. So I am big on RJ Lewis as well. I think there are a lot of different guys to look at here and different combinations we can roll with on this St. John's team, but I really like RJ Lewis at that 5'9" price. This may be a game we come away with, even though it's a larger slate, mini stacking St. John's. And you guys know I'm a big fan of stacking in college basketball. It works a lot. This is definitely one that we want to look to, whether that's Soriano Lewis, Ledlam Jenkins, some combination of those guys. I will probably, in my 20-plus lineups, even have 3 in certain spots. Naheem Aline does have an ankle injury that he's dealing with. He's officially listed as questionable. that playing time from him looks to be going right into Jordan Dingle. At least it did in their last game. Dingle's 5'2", playing mid-20s minutes. His shot rate is going up. He's certainly looking the part. It's 24% right now. He hasn't been able to fit into the role that he was at Penn. I think most of us were smart enough to realize he wouldn't. But at 5'2", he's at least in consideration there too, just because of the fact that there is no Naheem Aline and Dingle starts to play 25, 26 minutes. He gets closer to making value there, and that is a solid price point where I think most people would go to Lewis. Dingle offers us some leverage there in large field GPPs. On the Xavier side, when they played St. John's the first go round, again, it was a high-scoring affair. Desmond Cloud, 21 and 12, just a really big game there. Davian McKnight struggled. Quincy Olivares kind of struggled a little bit, 13 points, 3 rebounds. Since then, Olivares has been just nails offensively, one of the best scorers in the conference, putting up some big numbers. Prices on Xavier reminds me a lot of last year's Creighton team. They're not overpriced. They're not underpriced. They're just priced the way that they should be. Des Cloud is one of my favorite players on this team, and overall, I just love the way he plays. But that price of 7.5 is going to be a bit restrictive to the fact that I want more of the St. John side, and there are going to be some sacrifices having to be made on a large slate such as this. Cloud is the best overall Xavier play for my money. So if you do want to get there, he makes the most sense. Looking at the overall rates, he leads the team in shot rate and usage rate, 26% and 27%, and assist rate at 22%, which is only behind Davian McKnight, who is the leader of the team at 26.4%. You do have Abu Osman at 6'3", the lead front court player at this stage. Got to stay out of foul trouble to be effective. I think it would behoove St. John's to go at him early and often, get him into foul trouble, and remove him from the game. If Abu does pick up too early, the rest of the front court just doesn't have the chops to keep Ledlam off the glass or Soriano from doing whatever he wants on the block. All right, next game on the slate here, Northwestern versus Purdue. Total 142.5. 13.5 point favorites are Purdue. Main decision here is, do you want to roster Zach Edey? That is the case each and every Purdue slate, if we can roster Zach Edey. I feel like I'm going to continue to fade him in Maine, get exposure, but we're talking about such a high price here at 10, 8, 11K. It's just very, very restrictive. And he has been just knocking down each and every opponent that he plays, putting up these massive scores. So it is risky, but we have to keep in mind that he's not super high owned each slate because of the restrictive price. So even when he pops off and puts up these 50, 55s, hell, even 60, yeah, it feels bad sometimes not having him, but we're not necessarily losing slates because of it. So that is a nice thing to know about when you're rostering Edey or fading. I continue to try to look to Braden Smith. He has been very solid, scored 29 plus fantasy points in 5 straight. To me, he's the guy that you want when you are fading Zach Edey. With the way Northwestern plays, I don't necessarily think that this one is going to be very high scoring. I think actually the under is live. Smith still projects quite well for me, especially if we give him 36, 37 minutes, somewhere in there. He's the best overall Purdue play by a mile. You do get a little bit of value here with Fletch Lawyer at 5'2". Don't mind him if you want to get a little bit of exposure to this team without breaking the bank. And then you have Lance Jones, who's priced all the way up to 6'8" now after just completely dominating lately. Now, this kid is awesome because he's out there for his defensive prowess, but he doesn't need to score. 1 for 10 from the field against Rutgers, still put up almost 40. That's truly impressive, making 1 shot and still putting up that score due to 10 rebounds, 8 assists, and 5 steals. Still like Trey Kaufman-Renn. Minutes have stagnated a little bit there. That's just because Edey's not getting into foul trouble, but he's another one of those GPP looks there. If you're playing a narrative a bit, if Edey does get into foul trouble, something happens, Kaufman-Renn's going to see that spike in usage and minutes. On the Northwestern side, I have not found myself rostering too much Northwestern, especially lately. And in these matchups, these kind of classic physical or expected to be physical Big Ten spots, I don't find myself feeling too bad about fading them either. So I think we'll be all right if we don't attack Northwestern. The typical characters to look at here in the high usage guys, Boo Buie, Brooks Barnheiser, both priced well over 8K. You do have Ryan Langborg at 5.7, who's a depressed price there. I do kind of like him just because he's playing so many minutes, 35 plus in 4 straight. As they get closer to conference tournament season, it looks like they're starting to lean on Langborg a bit more. And then you have Ty Berry at 5.6. A GPP special for sure. Has steals upside, takes a ton of shots. It's amazing that he's still playing and still relevant for this team, but very difficult to consider him a main team option. He does have pretty decent rates. He shoots 42% from long range. So don't hate that look there at the 5.6 price. Front court options for Northwestern have been dreadful. Matthew Nicholson, he had a 34 against Illinois, and he had actually 3 straight games over 20, which caused his price to balloon to 6K. We're never paying 6K for Nicholson. He is 5'8" after having more of a usual game, 4 points, 3 rebounds against Ohio State. Foul trouble written all over him. The fact of the matter is anybody in the front court is typically going to be at risk, and Nicholson is especially going to be at risk here going up against Edey. And that'll be the case for Nick Martinelli, who's going to have to take time guarding him, and Luke Hunger, who did play 23 minutes against Ohio State and looked better, has been starting, but his minutes are very, very sporadic right now. All right, next game on the slate, we have Baylor versus UCF. Baylor 3-point favorites, total of 139. UCF has impressed. They have been very, very good, much better than I expected in the Big 12 this year. 12-7 record, so not, blowing the doors off by any means, but competitive losses against BYU, Cincinnati. Obviously, the Houston game was awful, but a very big road win over Texas, a home win over Kansas, like 2 games that I just really did not expect them to win. So I give UCF all the respect, and they have the 8th ranked defense per Ken Palm's metrics. So this is a defensive squad that can really lock you up if you're not prepared. Last game, UCF did have a few guys out. Shamari Allen is in a walking boot when their last game ended up not playing. That opened up playing time for others. CJ Walker also did not go. What happened with that is Marcellus Avery ended up getting additional minutes. He was the play we kind of keyed in on, at least early in the non-con season. He looked very good. Started to lose playing time to Diallo and Walker as he returned. Played 31 minutes against a tough Cincinnati team on the road and put up 19-7. He's there at 5.5. So depending on those injury situations for UCF, if Walker's out again, I'd certainly like Marcellus Avery, even at 5.5. His price has gone up slightly, not enough to get spooked off by any means. He's going to soak up a lot of those front court minutes all to himself. Other options, and prices dropped a ton on Darius Johnson. They've had a string of really rough matchups. Houston, like I said, BYU, Cincinnati. So this has caused him to shoot very poorly. He's made just 2 shots in his last 3 games, 0 for 6 against Houston, 1 for 8 against West Virginia, and 1 for 9 against Cincinnati. What this has done has caused his price to torpedo from 7K all the way down to 5.7. This is one of those classic buy low spots you hear us talk about all the time. Whenever we can get a guy who is typically priced up in the 7K range and still playing a ton of minutes over 34 and a key part of his team, we have to get involved. We're going to be able to fit 2, maybe even 3 guys in that 7.5 to 8.5 range in this slate. And it's going to be done not from punting a bunch of times, but from loading the rest of our roster with these sub 6K guys. And Darius Johnson absolutely represents one of those looks for us. 23.3% usage rate, 22% shot rate, leads the team in assist rate at 22%, and has one of the higher steal rates on the team at 38.4%, shooting 36% from long range on 92 attempts as well. So I hope that people are overlooking Darius Johnson or forgetting about him because of how bad he's been, but he at 35 minutes at this price in a slightly better matchup than he's been seeing, but still not great. I'm going to definitely be all over him. Jalen Sellers at 6'6". I do feel like that's an advantageous spot for him as well. He has been playing exceptionally well, pretty consistent. While Darius Johnson has been struggling, Sellers has been carrying the load, especially on the offensive end. He's going to be a key cog for them at all times. We do have Ibrahima Diallo, who ended up, I believe he got banged up as well, missed all but 6 minutes against Cincinnati. So we'll see what happens there, because all of a sudden UCF's front court is ailing, and that means more minutes for Omar Payne as well, who has been around for a very long time. Might remember him in Miami and Jacksonville and everywhere else, playing through all the Florida schools. But what it comes down to is Marcellus Avery being a big-time play here and having to play roughly 25 to 30 minutes. Tierno Silva, who played 29 minutes at 3.9, also will be relied upon as a bit of a value in a spot starter. There are various options on this USCF team that we're going to want to utilize here today. On the Baylor side, you have Ray J. Dennis, Jacoby Walker, and Yves Missy. Those are typically your top three, all priced accordingly. Missy at 6'7". If he can just not foul, especially early, he can put up some really exceptional numbers. We saw it in the overtime game against TCU, multiple overtimes, I should say. 41 minutes in that one, 9 rebounds, 25 points, doing a lot of work on the low block. He was just completely unstoppable. Nobody on the TCU front court had an answer, and he put up a very big game. Now his price has shot up from 5'6" to 6'7", so it's another spot where we have probably missed the boat a little bit, but he makes sense as a GPP look, especially with UCF having a multitude of injuries, ailments, and things going on with their front court. If we don't go Missy, it does make sense to play somebody like Jacoby Walter, who at 7'1" has upside in this spot, even though the defense of UCF is nails. Don't find myself probably paying up for Ray J. Dennis, and we do have a little bit of value here between Jaden Nunn at 5'3" and Langston Love right around 5'6". Those two have been interchangeable throughout the season. A lot of times it's been Jaden Nunn hitting threes, taking control, being a really good third or fourth option. But Langston Love has started to pilfer work from him, whether that's usage, shots, or minutes, and now he's become one of the more consistent options on the team that isn't one of the more expensive. 42 minutes against TCU, 11 points, 10 rebounds. He has scored 22-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 5. At 5'6", I don't mind looking at a little bit of Langston Love there too, but I'm not exactly looking to stack this game either. So these are options for you MMEers. Look around, bounce around, and fill out the rest of your lineups. Don't stack this game necessarily, although it might be tough not to have 2 UCF in some of your lineups because of those prices on Johnson and Marcellus Avery. All right, next game on the slate here, we're going to keep rolling through. Cincinnati versus West Virginia. The Bearcats 4-point favorites, total of 145. You know, Ray Battle, man, anytime he has a difficult matchup, it is tough to want to roster him because the defense has clamped him down. But what we've seen here with back-to-back games below 15 fantasy points and 3 times in the past 4, a ridiculously cheap price on Ray Battle, and it makes you not care what their matchup is one bit. He is only 5'8". That is a obvious buy low spot for our guy Ray Battle. I think, I keep on thinking he's going to be, with his depressed price, chalky, right? But he hasn't been that highly owned, and I'm wondering if people will again kind of just leave him off and at like sub 10% ownership on Battle, even in the toughest of matchups. It just makes way too much sense in GPP to roster him well above that. I'm going to have him in a significant amount of lineups. This is yet another tough Big 12 spot against a defense in Cincinnati that can clamp him down, force him into bad shots, rattle him off of his game. But GPP-wise, there's just far too much upside here for Battle, and I think everybody realizes that. I think people are scared to roster him in these kind of matchups, but I'm just going to keep on doing it. 31% usage rate, 34% shot rate. You know what you're going to get here with Ray Battle. As far as other options go in West Virginia, I would probably ignore the rest. We've seen some good work out of Patrick Sumanik. Kirk Creases had okay games. Cook is cheap. Noah Farrakhan was shooting well early on in his West Virginia tenure. But it's mainly just Ray Battle. I don't want to get too cute here trying to stack against Cincinnati. So that's where I'm going to look. On the Cincinnati side, we do have some injuries. Victor Lakin was actually not injured, but sick. I feel like he'll be back for this one. It's the season, guys. We're seeing illnesses. COVID's popping back up. I know it never really left. The flu, all of that. So Lakin getting over his illness should be back in the mix here playing. The Cincinnati starting lineup without him, let's peep that out real quick against UCF, and they won that game 68-57. They went with Seamus Lukosius, Aziz Bandiago, Day Thomas, Dan Skillings, and John Newman, and they got the job done. Didn't really utilize their bench. They had Gislo James play 11, but Lakin will be back in the mix there. For Cincinnati, prices are fair. I think Lakin's worth a GPP look at the 7K there coming back. But outside of him, there's not a lot that I like necessarily for my main. There's some cheap price guys like Day Thomas and Seamus Lukosius, but they're far from a guarantee even at those prices. You also have Aziz Bandiago at 64. If he were to play 30-plus minutes and Lakin was for whatever reason not able to go, that would make him a pretty strong play as well. But I do want to say you have two more options in Day and Seamus under 6K in that 5K range that you can really fill out the rest of your lineup with. We're going to be zoning in on guys like that. I do like Day Thomas. He plays a lot. He doesn't have phenomenal upside by any means, but he does have strong rates across the board. 24% assist rate, 3.5% steal rate, 25% shot rate, and a 24% usage rate. The youngster Gislo James and the heir apparent at the point guard position, 26% shot rate, 25% assist rate, 25% usage rate. He's only priced at 3.7, doesn't start. Minutes are pretty well capped between 12 to 15, but he is interesting in this spot against West Virginia because I do think he could run at a high fantasy point per minute number and pay that price off even with 15 minutes. All right, next game on the slate here, we have Wake Forest versus Pitt. 1.5 point favorites is Pitt, 143.5 total. Pitt, man, they've been letting us down lately. They've been hurting our feelings a little bit because when everybody's on Blake Hinson, he busts. When everybody's on Carlton Carrington, he busts. It's been a pretty sour mood when it comes to this team. I still like this team, and I especially like this matchup for DFS purposes. So as much as they continue to hurt me, I keep coming back for more, and I'm going to do so here in this matchup. Carrington especially owes us one after that last game, and this is a spot against a Wake Forest defense that he can absolutely go off against. It'll be interesting to see what ownership is on the various Pitt guys. I think people at this stage have sort of forgot how good Wake Forest games are for our DFS game, and the prices on these Pitt guys outside of Blake Hinson are really advantageous. Hinson there at 7.5. I think he's always a worthy GPP look. Now, Wake Forest's front court is solidified with Efton Reed, so I don't think Hinson will be able to take advantage at any point there in the front court. His rebounding numbers will probably be down slightly, and if he's not shooting really well, then it's going to be tough for him to pay this off. Now, he did hit 4 of 12 attempted threes in his last game, and he took 19 shots there against Miami. It was a loss, but he was doing it all for them, and he will occasionally have that happen. But this is a spot where I want to jump off, and I want to play for 1K less Carlton Carrington, who still played 35 minutes against Miami, 24 fantasy points despite only shooting 2 of 11 for the field. He's due some positive regression. He's had some rough shooting afternoons. 4 for 16 against Duke, 0 for 10 against Syracuse, and then 3 for 9 against Duke right after that. He was 6 of 10 against Georgia Tech, one of his better games, only time eclipsing 25 fantasy points in the last 5. I think, like I said, we're going to see some positive shooting regression here from him. He's only shooting 29% from long range on 123 attempts. So he is still firing. He still has a high usage rate. He's still on the floor for 35 plus minutes. Something's got to give here. This is an advantageous price. I will be trying to fit Carrington into my lineup somewhere, somehow, while the masses probably ignore him widely. As far as the rest go, you have the 6K Ish Leggett. Ish has really stepped up. It seems his shoulder issue is starting to be fine now. I think he's overcome that. We've seen him score 20 plus fantasy points in 3 straight games. He was really strong in 31 minutes against Miami, 14, 4, and 4. Still, even with a slight price increase to 6K, he's a very good look. And they've got a multitude of guards here. This might scare some people off because they do have some cannibalization going on with the touches because they have multiple guards. But what they've done here is played hardly anyone off the bench aside from Ish Leggett. So we've now witnessed Pitt go from about an 8-9-man rotation to suddenly 6. Guillermo Diaz-Graham barely playing. They've been starting Blake Hinson, Carlton Carrington, Federico, Zach Austin, and then Jalan Lowe, who continues to play spectacularly. And then Ish Leggett, who missed time with the shoulder issue, got to the bench. They're bringing him off the bench. He's been a spark plug. And what they've effectively been doing is playing Leggett over Austin in the second half and running with that 5. That gives them the best chance to win. So even though they have a lot of guys in the same position, they're all on the floor together and they're playing the entire game. With Jalan Lowe, his price has continued to go up. He's 6'4", right in that range with the rest of Leggett and Carrington. Still very much in play. Each and every game that happens, I expect him to regress or Leggett to take the starting spot or finally a bust from Lowe. But he consistently produces and has so over the last 4 games where he scored 26 plus in each. So they're keeping him in this starting spot, and his shot rate has completely spiked. In the last 5 games, these are his shot attempts: 13, 9, 16, 15, and 10. So Lowe is certainly not a guy that we want to completely write off now all of a sudden with Leggett's reemergence and Carrington's likely blow-up game. It's coming. We still want to have exposure to Jalan Lowe. Wake Forest side, we've got some nice-looking prices here. Cam Hildreth, my guy at 6'3". Now, he has been far from consistent, trying to figure out life with these transfers. He hasn't been the best main team option, very much a GPP look. This Wake Forest team runs a rotation that's fairly easy to predict, even with the reintroduction of Damari Monsanto. We're typically looking at a very condensed group that's going to be playing all of the minutes. Let's look at their last game there where they lost by a lot to North Carolina. Hunter Salas, Efton Reed, Andrew Carr, Cameron Hildreth, and Kevin Miller. Then they run Parker Fredrickson still and Damari Monsanto off the bench. Zach Keller picks up some spot and blowout minutes. With Hunter Salas, he's still probably, for me, the best overall play, like not factoring in price or anything, just overall like talent-wise, Salas is the go-to guy on this team for me. Transferring out of Gonzaga and with a coach here in Wake Forest that has a history in Steve Forbes of developing guys from role players into conference player of the year types, this is the best thing for him. Salas has a shot rate above 26%, making 40% from long range. Price $7K. It's fair. It's reasonable. It's one of those ones where, last man in types, perhaps we're not starting our lineup with him, but we're not poo-pooing him also if you do end up landing there. Boopy Miller, 6'9", about the same. I still prefer Salas over him. Efton Reed at 6'8". Pitt's front court has some dudes. They have some size. Federico, that's going to keep Reed from grabbing every rebound and being super aggressive. Fouls on the road for Efton Reed are what would worry me the most. The 6'8" price point, it's just not that advantageous. Now, Damari Monsanto's there at 4'9". He played 11 minutes against Louisville, went nuts in that 11 minutes, played 15 against North Carolina, not so much, but cleared expect those minutes to continue to trend up. I think we're looking at Monsanto in a, even if he doesn't eventually go into the starting lineup, we're going to be talking about a 20 to 25 minute type of player. I do like him still because of his strong rates over the years and what we can expect, but he's not a super discounted value at 4.9, especially when we have a plethora of options that are above 5K but below 6K. That's going to be the money range there, and whoever gets those 2-3 spots right is going to be the one that walks away winning all of the money. So I do like Monsanto, but he's not a priority. All right, next game on the slate here. We're halfway through. We're cruising, ladies and gentlemen. Let's keep it going. Notre Dame versus Virginia. Virginia 13-point favorites, 115 total. Yeek. That's not great. Now, last time Virginia was on the slate against Notre Dame, they ended up losing 76-54. And what happened there was J.R. Cone got super, super hot from long range, made 4 of 5. Braden Shrewsbury knocked one down. Kerry Booth was knocking down threes, and Marcus Burton was doing his thing as well. So they just got hot from long range. Virginia didn't have the chops to hang with them. I don't think we see a similar scenario. I think Virginia just chokes the life out of the arena early, and they slow down Notre Dame to a crawl and make them work out of the half-court offense, which is going to be bad news bears for Notre Dame because they're not going to get any clean looks off from long range. Now, they have adjusted. We've talked about that DVP spot against Virginia for the last, 2-3 years, but they've adjusted, and they're not giving up big games to opposing front court players anymore. Now, last time Notre Dame did play them, Kerry Booth had himself a pretty nice game, honestly. 17 points, 9 rebounds. Again, he hit a couple of triples on his way to 32 fantasy points. Probably the best game of his career, if not one of them. He had a slightly better game against Western Carolina earlier this year. But as far as conference games go, he was fantastic there. Now, 4.8, I do think he's viable. Now, foul risk is there slightly, but we're talking about minutes being sporadic. And Tay Davis, who was in the doghouse earlier this season, has apparently worked his way out because he's played 27-plus minutes in 3 of the last 5, and he's taking minutes directly out of Kerry Booth's hands. So it's tough to want to use either of them, especially in this spot, right? It's not advantageous. The total is ridiculously low. We've got totals on the slate like the Kentucky game's about 170, 171. We're talking about a 115. I like to pride myself, much like Razzle and a few others, on finding the plays in games like this, but it just doesn't make sense to be milling around the Notre Dame side. On the Virginia side, we can utilize some guys. Ryan Dunn had a big game at low rostership, and he was the one that I was most excited about. But because of that game, it's made his price balloon up there to nearly 8K. So now it's going to be hard to get up. At the low 7K range, we're talking about a really strong play. He has put up 30-plus fantasy points in each of the last 3. It's just going to be hard for us to get to that price point, and that's going to be the main reason. Jordan Minor has been a strong value for us for weeks. We did jump off last game because of the price that went up to 5.8. He's sitting there at almost 6K. Only played 10 minutes. He was just in major foul trouble against Louisville. I think he's fine, but he's not a DFS option there at 6K, at least not until his price comes back down. Isaac McNeely, always worth a look because of his high shot rate, but 5.7, it's kind of just a okay price point there for me as well. We have seen some Dante Harris. Minutes were trending up until last game, kind of fighting through that ankle issue, not quite ready to start using him just yet at 3.5. Not a lot to like in this game overall. Next game here, which is one of the higher totals on the slate, as I just mentioned, Kentucky versus Florida. Total of 171. Kentucky 5.5-point favorites. Now, Kentucky plays a fun style in which fantasy points on both sides, for and against, generally are everywhere. Mini game stacks of Kentucky games have been very, very solid and well worth it. We do have to track a little bit. I don't think we'll have any relevant injuries or sicknesses or anything like that, but we will have to track it because Rob Dillingham did end up sitting out in their last game because of that dreaded flu that is going around the country. With a kid getting sick on a team, that generally means other players may or may not get sick because they're around them all the time. So we are seeing every day, every slate that passes by, a situation where there's a surprise scratch or late breaking news where somebody's out and we have to react. So with this being a full slate all through the day and night from 3:30 PST till 6, we're going to have to stay with our heads on a swivel. It's not a broken up slate. All the games not locking at once. This is the middle of the slate. You'll have some PMR left. You want to make sure that you're paying attention because if we get news that, Wagner's out or Reeves are out, somebody relevant like that, it's going to change the complexity of the slate. And we're going to have to get heavier exposure to this Kentucky team. So we'll see how that works out and who's actually going to be in and who's actually going to be out. Expecting Dillingham to be in, though. Like, it would take probably Reeves being out for me to suddenly want to jump on Dillingham. He does have phenomenal rates. He's been really good this year. But 6'6", still a pretty hefty price for me using a guy that typically comes off the bench, even though the Florida matchup is phenomenal. Florida's defense has been suspect, and they're giving up a ton. It was 87-85 last time these two teams played, by the way. Kentucky, 12th in tempo, while Florida is 18th. These two teams got it on in their first matchup, and this was at Florida. They suffered the 2-point loss. It was a balanced effort from Kentucky with Reeves, Bradshaw, Shepard, Mitchell, and Wagner all scoring in double digits, while Walter Clayton and Zion Pullen put on a show, took 15-plus shots each. Both scored 23 points. Riley Kugel had 15 off the bench. Speaking of Riley Kugel, where do you stand with him? He's only priced at 5.4. Didn't play more than 19 minutes in either of the last two games after trending upward, putting up a real nice game against Arkansas and Missouri, and even 32 minutes against Tennessee. Without him being a starter, it's very hard to peg. I'm not going to be on Riley, even in this spot, even though it's a great matchup, unless you can definitively say he's going to play 20-plus minutes. As of now, there's really no way to do that. Alex Condon at 6'4". He's a bit of a sneakier look here. If we get foul trouble for Micah Handlogden, which I think does happen, we'll see a spike in playing time for Condon, maybe to the 25-minute range. It's a real nice GPP look for him because of his solid rates and how well he projects typically anytime we're able to give him 20-plus minutes. As far as the rest of the looks here, Zion Pullen's the most expensive at $8K, 42 against Georgia most recently. He's not just really fit into this system. Took him a few games once he did, but he has been absolutely wonderful. I don't hate the idea of paying the 8K price point for him just because he's going to be playing 35, 36 minutes. He does have great overall rates, shooting 39% from long range, but we're going to be probably using him more as a luxury play in alt builds and not more of a core look. Instead, I want to look to Walter Clayton, who's priced down at 6'9", hasn't had the blow-up games lately, but this is a spot against Kentucky. I could see him doing well. He did have 36 against them last time out, so I like Clayton over Pullen here for the discount. Will Richard's there at 6'8", back-to-back games above 35, one against Mississippi State, one against Georgia. Can't write him off, but that is a really expensive price. Earlier in the year, Richard's $2K cheaper than Walter Clayton. Now they're the same price. I can't, in my mind, justify going there to him when Walter Clayton, to me, is just a better overall option there. Does lead the team in shot rate at 24%, shooting 35% from long range. On the Kentucky side, if I'm not using Dillingham, and I'm typically not using Shepard either. I know Shepard has big games, minutes 35 there without Dillingham. He'll go back in that mid-20s range with Dillingham, which really hurts him. 7'6", just a little bit too high there. Trey Mitchell, the undersized front court player, continues to just play extremely well in every matchup. So I can't write him off here. I think Florida does have the front court and size to keep him off the glass, but he was really good against them last time, 12-10. The only part here that baffles me about Mitchell continuing to perform is the fact that Kentucky's healthy in the front court. They have Ugonna Onyenso playing 15 to 20 minutes. They have Aaron Bradshaw playing 15 to 20 minutes. These are 7-footers. And then the inclusion of Zvonimir Ivicevic, who's now available, only played 3 minutes against the Arkansas team. Against Georgia, went completely nuts. Looks like they're going to take him a little bit slow there. But still, he's there pilfering 5, 10, 15 minutes perhaps. So there's a lot of minutes and usage in the front court bouncing around, but I got to give it to Mitchell. He continues to perform at a high level, priced a little high for my liking at $8K, but every time I go to write him off, he's performing, putting up 30-plus fantasy points. All right, next game on the slate here, Arkansas versus Missouri. 5.5-point favorite are Missouri, total of 143. It's going to be an ugly game. What can we say? It's really not going to be an attractive game to watch if you're a basketball purist. But for our game of DFS purposes, I got to like Missouri here. When it comes to the Arkansas side, I'm less excited for them because this rotation is getting out of hand now. We're seeing, Mack, Khalif Battle, L. Ellis, Chandler Lawson, Jalen Graham, Mekhi Mitchell, Davenport, Blocker, Pinion. Like they're all taking turns and getting minutes. There has been some recent injuries and news that have popped up, which Trevon Brazile did suffer a knee injury, a while ago, or recently, I should say, did miss the game against Kentucky. It's been something that's been bothering him. He's officially questionable, so might be without Brazile. And then you have Devo Davis, who has been with this program for a long time, has consistently been next man up, but they recruit over him. They bring transfers in over him, and this season has been an absolute disaster. I think Arkansas fans will agree, and they have to come to terms with maybe Musselman isn't the guy that they thought he was. To ignore roster composition and the way teams fit together and just going out and getting the most ball-dominant player times 6 was never going to work. And you're seeing that. And Devo Davis has apparently stepped away from the program. I doubt he comes back, especially with Arkansas season quickly spiraling out of control. And that's a shame. That's really sad because Devo Davis is a hell of a player, but and he was loyal. Like, say what you will about the portal, and I support kids going where they want, but there's something to be said about loyalty as well. And Devo stayed in an impossible situation as long as he could. We didn't see Menafield in that last game either. It was a DMP CD, so coach's decision, after he played 24 minutes in the game before that. And that's what Musselman does. He will play a guy 30 minutes, then he'll play him 2, then he'll start, then he won't, and it just becomes so frustrating. So at least now there's less toys in the chest here for Musselman to play, but you can't sit here and say, hey, last game, Khalif Battle in 34 minutes, scored 25. He's a guarantee to play 40 and he's going to go off. Like, he could get rugged at any moment. That's just the nature of this team right now. L. Ellis sitting there at 4-4. He played 32 minutes. It might be safe to go back in the water with L. Ellis at that price. He has played over 20 minutes in 4 straight, but Musselman, you just can't figure him out. I almost feel like if you're not MMEing this slate, you can't use Arkansas guys in your main. And I know a lot of people will say, well, that, there's less guys out there. There are minutes. We know Tremont Mark, and it's like, yeah, we know Tremont Mark's going to play, but you're paying 7.5 for him. You're not getting a discount. What you really want is one of these sub 5K options. And what we really want to know is if they're actually going to play 25, 30 minutes as a starter. So we'll see what happens with Trevon Brazile. This is a great spot to target against Missouri because Missouri has been a sieve for fantasy points, but good luck if you end up going down this road with Arkansas. I will be targeting the Missouri side with the way that Arkansas is playing and how just dreadful things have been. They have been involved in some really ideal scenarios for DFS purposes. It starts with Sean East, who is an elite GPP look at 7.7. I think a lot of people will probably not find a way to roster him there. Tamar Bates at 6-1 will be the more popular of the two because of the price discount and how just electric of a scorer he's been. Noah Carter's always worth a shot in GPP at 6-5. He's no longer a main team play. And then you have a bunch of values, guys like Nick Honor, Jesus Carrello Martin, Anthony Robinson, who sat recently, Aiden Shaw, who's been having some pretty decent production, Jordan Butler, whose minutes have been kind of trending upwards. So there's some cheapies here you can look at as well. But for the most part, you're making a decision between Sean East and Tamar Bates. Now, they haven't won since just after Christmas, speaking of Missouri. So they're after a successful non-con. For the most part, they lost to Kansas in a close one, and Seton Hall in a close one, but they're now 8-12, and under Dennis Gates, they're as good as they were last year, and in the tournament, they're likely not even going to make the NIT. So answers have to be had here, but I think at this point we see a two-man game between Sean East and Tamar Bates, and what I mean by that is they're going to be taking all the shots on this team. I do want to see more minutes for Carrello Martin, who started last game, played 10. Jordan Butler started and played 13. They brought Noah Carter off the bench, who played 27. So we'll see how that starting lineup shakes out here. Martin's 4-4. Butler near the min price there at 3-1 is a forward slot there. So as a starter, he played 23 minutes in the game against Texas A&M before that. As a starter, once again, over Noah Carter, I don't mind going there at 3-1, but just realize you're probably going to get a 2, maybe 3x score. But it's not a horrible thing to have happen. And I was basically 80% of my lineups stuffed Brandon Murray and Chaz Kelly in there, which isn't normally what I do, but felt like they could get at least 2, 3x, and they did. Doesn't always work that way, but at near min price, a starting Jordan Butler at least makes sense to a degree. And Tamar Bates paying 6-1 for him is no thing at this stage with the way that he's playing. All right, next game on the slate here, Providence versus UConn. This one is a 13-point spread for the Huskies, total of 140. Now, last year after UConn won the title, I had made the comment that their championship window's easily open for the next 3 or 4 years because they're going to be able to recruit really well, which they did right after. And they're going to be able to bring in 1-2 marquee transfers a season because who doesn't want to play for the defending national champions? They bring in a stellar freshman class, which was already basically signed before the title anyways. And then they go out and get Cam Spencer, who's been such a great boost to this team from Rutgers. Without Spencer there to replace the losses of their core last year with Sanogo, Jordan Hawkins, Andre Jackson, like they've been able to retool and Cam Spencer has stepped right into that Hawkins scoring role and been really good. It's a spot I kind of want to bet Providence, honestly, because 13 seems like so much, but then I have to reel it in and remember that Providence is essentially a one-man show right now. They have others. Joshua Doro plays really well. Don't get me wrong. He can contribute here, but I don't think he'll be so effective against this Connecticut defense. And I think Carter is going to have to hard carry in this one. So it makes sense if he gasses out Connecticut winning by 13 plus. As far as prices go, we have Klingen at 7-3. He was industry chalk last time out against Xavier in 18 minutes in the blowout, put up 35. Price is up to 7-3 here. They're bringing him along slowly. He's always been a high fantasy point per minute player, has great rates. I don't mind using him at 7-3 here against Providence. He's not a main team look and not a priority, but clinging exposure is certainly nothing to sneeze at. Cam Spencer at 7-8 and Tristan Newton at 8-5. They're probably a tad priced out just for me. Some of the other guys we've already talked about are in slightly better game environments. So I think Newton, I'm going to be probably underweight compared to the rest of the field, and I don't know that this will be a game necessarily he has to put up 40 plus. I am liking Alex Karaban at 7-2 just because of how steady he has been. He is a solid type of player to use in single entry contests. And then you have Stephen Castle there at 6-7, slightly priced down from where he's been the last month. And he just did put up 30 against Xavier. Certainly like him. Minutes, though, because of the fact that Connecticut just blew out Xavier. His minutes were down. I would expect him to be back into the 30s here against Providence. On the Providence side, Devin Carter. It's like every slate that we don't roster Devin Carter, it's just like a kick in the nuts. At 9-3 against Georgetown, that was an easy lock and load, puts up 50. He had 47 against DePaul, 35 against Xavier, 60 against St. John's, 35 against Seton Hall, 46 against Creighton, 41 against Marquette. Like, just a sicko of a player that we may not have him around too much longer here. He might be going pro sooner than we want him to. Playing the entire game, taking a ton of shots, but contributing in all other categories. And there's safety. If ever there was a time to pay for a 10K player, I think it has to be Devin Carter. Now, matchup is brutal against UConn, but he's earned the right to be called matchup proof. I think everybody else on Providence is a fade. Joshua Doro's likely not to continue his streak of 30-plus fantasy point games. He has 4 in a row. Ticket Gaines, who's had some nice recent production, I think he is going to have a hard time. Jaden Pierre is going to be cuffed on the perimeter. All he's really trying to do is shoot anyways. And then we know Garwi Duell, Corey Floyd, those guys are very minimalist type options that I would not expect to do well. So that being said, it's give me Devin Carter or give me death. And even then, I'm probably light on Devin Carter, even though I hate doing that. I'll have exposure, but he's not a priority play. And that's the first time I've said that in a long time. But I just respect this UConn team too much. The defending national champions, they looked primed and ready to run it back. All right, next game here. We're almost done. Penn State versus Rutgers. Rutgers 7-point favorites, total of 143. Say it with me, kids. DVP, Penn State. What do we like to do against them? Target big men. How much do we like to target against them? A lot. How much Cliff Omarui do we need to have? All of it. Give it all to me. 7.4K. I'm actually happy it's not 6K or 6.5, something like that, where he would have been super chalky. 7.4 will make people look the other way. Now, Omo played 30 minutes against Purdue, which is pretty impressive because I wasn't expecting him to play more than 20. I figured he would get the Zach Edey treatment and just get into foul trouble immediately. That didn't happen. It wasn't the most impressive game in the world, 13-6, but he took 10 shots. And this is strange because normally, Omarui's not taking a lot of shots. He's one of those big men they don't feature. He has to do his work on putbacks. He gets a lot of rebounds. He blocks shots, but he has taken over 35 shots in total over the past 3 games. Don't know if this recent trend is going to continue, but 40 fantasy points against Nebraska, 35 against Illinois, and then he had the 22 against Purdue. Now he gets a home game against Penn State, a Penn State front court that cannot catch a cold, let alone trying to contain Cliff Omarui. We continue to plug and play all lead front court players against Penn State, and we're not going to stop doing that anytime soon. Give me all the Cliff Omarui for one night only. We're taking him and his 35% combined rebounding rate, his 13% block rate, and we're going to ride Omarui to the green screens. Lock and load. Core play, you don't even have to ask. There are other options in the front court we can look at here if we want to get a little cute, some alt exposure. We're not going to run 100% Omarui, although I'll be tempted. We have some looks here. Andre Hyatt, somebody who can definitely do damage in this matchup at 6'6", an excellent GPP leverage play. Mawat Mag, who has been really good in conference play, fell off the last 2. Now he's in a bounce back spot where he can produce against Penn State as well. Mag has a pretty solid overall usage and shot rate. And he's shooting almost 30% from long range, a bit more versatile than I think people realize. Other than those 3, I don't have the same level of love for the guards. The Penn State perimeter defense is the polar opposite. Now, they have Ace Baldwin, they have Nick Kieran, Kanye Clary. These guys are generating points from their defense a lot of the times via steals, via blocks. They're making a lot of things happen on that end, causing turnovers. So I don't necessarily like the Rutgers guards, and that means, 5'4" Derek Simpson, which is a pretty appealing price for him. I've had a hard time getting him right this year, so I'm not going to be too heavy on him. Would be worried about some turnover issues there. Austin Williams, who's been a very good value play, but minutes have diminished for him as Noah Fernandez start to go up, so that's coinciding together. Both are super cheap, but they're cannibalizing one another. And then JaMychal Davis, who played 23 minutes and scored 9 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. But I think we see him in that range too, 18 to 20. And all the guards are just kind of sharing the sugar with each other and playing shared minutes, cannibalized touches, and it's not that great of a situation. So Cliff Omarui, yes. Some Hyatt and Mag shares, yes. Penn State side, Kanye Clary is officially considered day-to-day. I would expect him to play. It's a facial injury, if you will. So we'll see. I don't know that he misses time for this, but he has been one of the best scorers on the team. And if it's a situation where he has to wear a mask or, he's got some, vision issues, we could see him actually struggle quite a bit here. So we'll monitor that news. He's not really a play, but him being out would elevate Kieran, who's only 5'5", and Ace Baldwin, who's already playing the entire game, but there would be usage and shots to come to Ace Baldwin's way. Kieran at 5'5" with a boost to like 35 minutes would be a pretty strong play as well, and he happens to be in that 5 to 6K range that we want to fill our lineups out with. Also would look at like Puff Johnson there at 4'5", perhaps a minutes boost there. He played 20 against Ohio State recently and looked really good. DeMarco Dunn, who played 22 minutes recently as well. So some value plays are available here depending on how that news shakes out. All right, last game on the slate, Vanderbilt versus Auburn. The total is 143. Auburn big favorites at 18.5. The Auburn side is really good. They've lost 2 in a row, but their rotation seems to be normalizing to a degree, and Bruce Pearl might be starting to figure out how he wants to run this thing. He's been just giving everybody, 18 to 22 minutes and letting them figure it out. They did make some small changes. Trey Donaldson made the start against Mississippi State. Chris Moore, Katie Johnson, Jalen Williams, and Janai Broome. So Trey Donaldson getting in the start. That was his first start since late November. Played fairly well, productive, not a big game, but he certainly looked the part. And then Katie Johnson, who started his first game of the season. And what they did was bring Aiden Holloway off the bench and Denver Jones. That could easily switch back the other way, so we'll have to monitor there. But we do have the great news of Janai Broome playing over 30 minutes in their last outing. That was all I ever asked for, was Broome to play more than 25 minutes. Now, funny enough, it was a close game. They lost. Mississippi State actually contained him to a degree at 14-7. He put up 34, which is a respectable number, not what we need at 9K, 8-7, which is what he was. But I'm always yammering about, hey, if he plays 35 minutes, he's breaking the slate. He didn't break the slate, but if he gets 35 minutes in this matchup, in this spot against Vanderbilt, it's a wrap. As far as pay-ups go, Broome is definitely a priority for me. I think we see him go bonkers like we did against Alabama. So he's the guy I want. I do want to experiment with the others. Trey Donaldson at 5K. We could get him a little bit cheaper and feel better about it. But as a starter, if he's getting 20-plus minutes, I'm interested. Aiden Holloway below 5K. If he gets back in the starting lineup playing 20-plus minutes, I'd be interested. And then you have Chad Baker, who's a really nice GPP look. Guard forward eligibility at 5'5". Has had some down games recently, but he has an ability to put up 40, and this is a spot I could see him do so. And then lastly, Jalen Williams, 6'7". He's priced a little bit high for me. He's the next guy with Broome to get more than 20-plus minutes, but he's priced just about where he should be. I do want to keep an eye out on Katie Johnson getting a start again. He's 4'5". Didn't look particularly great against Mississippi State, but it's a cheap source of value there if he does get to start. Vanderbilt side, let's pull up Vandy's starting lineup here. Come on. All right. So they lost 75-62 in their last game. Usual starters such as Tyron Lawrence, Ezra Mannion, and Van Allen Lubin. We also saw Evan Taylor and Jason Rivera Torres. For a time, Jason Rivera Torres was a very strong option, performed for us quite consistently. Price has gone up right around that 6K range. Now he's in the mid fives. Don't love it against Auburn. Foul trouble. He can't stay if he has to check on to Broom or Williams for that matter. So I'm not going to be using Rivera Torres, but he has been the guy that I've liked the most for this team, just so that we're clear on that. We did see some starts for Jaquelin Roberts. That has apparently ended. He did only play 6 minutes off the bench. He is dealing with a hip, I believe what is being called a hip pointer, so that has cost him some time. But right now at near min price, unless he were to get back in the starting lineup, not worth it. Malik Presley, we saw some minute spikes there, but against Tennessee, barely played at 2 minutes. Not going to be usable here either. And I don't feel like I need to pay up for any of Mannion or Lawrence. So that leaves us with Van Allen Lubin, who would be in the same situation as Torres. If he gets on to Broom, he's just going to be sitting on the bench with 2 quick fouls. All right. So that is the slate. Tried to rip through that as fast and efficient as we could. I know it's super late. So core-wise, Cliff Omarui, core lock number 1, obvious. I mean, who else were we going to go with, right? He is just in the nut spot against Penn State. I'm going to be going and dropping whatever prop I can find for him. Probably 75% exposure in 20-plus lineups. Like, I'm very confident in this matchup. We haven't had a really good matchup-based DVP in a while, but we're getting it right here. All right, core play number 2. This is a two-parter because it's going to be not them together, but one or the other. Chris Ledlum or RJ Lewis, both priced reasonably. I like Soriano, but we're getting some nice savings for those players. And again, I'm really trying to line my lineup with guys in that RJ Lewis range, 5.5, 5.9, 6K. So I'm looking to do that. RJ Lewis is going to be there. And then the third core is Ray Battle. I don't care. He's 5'8". He has ridiculous rates. I know he struggled with his shot, but volume's going to be there. Matchup against Cincinnati, it's not great, but it's not nearly as bad as what he had been seeing with Houston and some of these other opponents. So Ray Battle, RJ Lewis / Chris Ledlum, and Cliff Omarui. Buy low opportunities on Darius Johnson of UCF, Day Thomas of Cincinnati, and Walter Clayton of Florida. Like this slate, very intrigued by it all. And as far as my favorite pay-ups go, I'm looking to Janai Broom, but there are quite a bit. Mark Sears, who I like, Zach Edey, Devin Carter. Make a decision there in your lineup which one you want to go with if you do go with a pay-up, but it is not necessary on this slate. All right, PrizePicks. Let's see what they've given us. The board is relatively light. This is typical for them. They're giving us more categories, so that's fun. All right. Nothing too exciting there. Let's see what the PRA's got us. So I do like Darius Johnson in not only a buy low spot, but a bounce back spot as well. His PRA is 17.5. We haven't been hitting the PRA as much, but that is one that I do like quite a bit and will be involved with. And then the rebounding, let's just see what Russell's is. 7.5 for Russell Chua, over 7.5 rebounds for him against Alabama. We're seeing bigs just, thriving in that spot because of the way that it's played and at the pace that it's played. There's a lot of rebounding opportunities. So I do like Russell to hit 8+ rebounds with pretty high confidence level in that one. All right, that will wrap up the show, late night edition. We will be off for a couple of days before returning on Friday to cover all day Saturday hoops. And I'm going to try and incorporate some of the secondary slates on that one. Depends on how fast we can go there with the main slate. Keep checking out ftnbets.com, the betting trackers there for Mike Randall and Mike Catrice, their prop and game betting that they are just crushing. I am adding my prop opportunities there as well. And in the Discord, we are really running well with props. So let's keep that going and get back on track with the green screens in DFS. Lots of opportunities to pad your bankroll. March right around the corner. Let's do it. Let's get it. Appreciate it, guys. See you on Friday. Take care.